now looked at the distinctness of the Father, Son, and the Spirit as persons. They are individual, they are distinct, but the question is, are they all God? Because we're going to see in other things in our next lesson, we're going to see issues where Jesus may have been really, 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 really powerful, but he's not truly God. We're going to look at that topic and say, okay, is the Father, the Son, and the Spirit truly God? Not just three distinct persons, but truly God. And we're going to first start with the Father. That's not particularly difficult. And then we're going to move to the Son, and we're going to kind of break that up into two sections, and then complete that out with looking at the Spirit as deity, as fully God. So let's look at the Father as God. And this, again, not too difficult to put forth in the Scriptures, but here's a couple of verses. Genesis 1:1, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Well, if the creator of all things is God, okay, he's divine. In John 6:27, it says, "Do not work for the food which perishes, but for the food which endures to eternal life, which the Son of Man shall give to you." Again, speaking of Jesus. "For on him the Father, even God, has set his seal." So again, God and Father are clearly articulated and clearly also distinct from Christ, and who also acknowledges him as God. In 1 Peter verses 1 and 2, Peter writes, "Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, to those who reside as aliens scattered throughout Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, Bithynia, who are chosen according to the foreknowledge of God the Father, and by the sanctifying blood of the Spirit, to obey Jesus Christ, to be sprinkled with his blood. May grace and peace be yours in fullest measure." Of course, we have the Trinity there referenced, mentions, etc., and the Father is, of course, God referenced there. So the Father's rarely anybody has any problem with that. The Bible's very clear. God is the Father is God, and not a problem. So now let's look at some of about the Son, his fullness. And we've referenced some of these verses, so I'm going to kind of just pick bits and pieces. I'll give you the reference so you can look them up in fullness. But I just want to point out Jesus is God, if you will. The Son is God. So first off, very clear, we've already looked at this verse, is John 1 through 4. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Okay, very clear. We know who the Word is. We know he became flesh, etc., as we go through that. So it's very clears both distinction, personality, and deity all right there. In Colossians 1:15 through 17, it says, "He," speaking of Christ, "is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both heavens and earth, and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones, dominions, or rulers, or authorities. All things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and all things hold together in him." Well, we know in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and here he is the image of the invisible God, and what you can see of what you can't see. And he's the creator, and all things are for him, and by him, he's God. Colossians 2:9, "For in him all the fullness of deity dwells in bodily form." So again, when we talk about Christology later on, in another class, that's where the God-man, the fullness of deity, dwells in bodily form. Christ incarnate, the Son eternal incarnate. So we know that he was the fullness of deity. So he is God. We also know that in John 1:18, "No one has seen the Father at any time. The only begotten, who is in the bosom of the Father, he," Christ, "has explained him," God. So he's the explanation of God. How can you explain something that you're not? In Hebrews, again, verses 2 through 3 and verse 8, says, "In these last days, he in the last days has spoken to us in his Son, whom he appointed heir of all things, through whom also he made the world." Okay, so again, through Christ he made the world, the Son. "And he is the radiance of the glory and the exact representation of his nature." Okay, well, if you're going to represent exactly who God is in nature, you must be God, because otherwise you can't do that. And later on in verse 8, it says, But the Son says, your throne, O God, is forever and forever, and the righteous scepter is the scepter of your kingdom. But of the Son he says, okay? So who is he speaking to? He's speaking to, this is God the Father speaking to the Son. What does he say? Your throne, O God. This is quoting from the Old Testament. Is forever and ever, and your righteous scepter is the scepter of his kingdom. There you go. So we see also when Jesus is dealing with Philip at the Last Supper in John 14:9, it says, have I been with you so long, and yet you have not come to know me, Philip? He who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? Okay? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father. If you know who I am, you know who God is, because I'm God. Philippians 2, 5 through 11, we've already seen this verse, but in verse 6 it says, who, although he existed in the form of God, did not regard equality with God a thing to be grasped. In other words, Christ could have stayed there, but he says, no, I'm going to go. What's he going to do? He's going to become incarnate. He's going to follow. He's going to be the sacrifices, all the other things that goes along with it. He is God, and yet he says, I will humble myself and be joined with humanity forever. And so we've got the equality of God. He existed in the form of God, who God is. Finally, in Revelation 22, verses 12 through 13 and verse 16, he says, behold, I am coming quickly, and my reward is with me, to render every man according to what he has done. I am the Alpha and Omega. It's the first and the last, the beginning and the end. And Alpha and Omega were the two Greek letters at the beginning and the ending of the Greek alphabet. That's why Alpha and Omega. First and the last, beginning and the end. I, Jesus, have sent my angel to testify to you these things for the churches. I am the root and the descendant of David, the bright morning star. So again, he is describing himself in terms that are only associated with deity. So we're going to sort of stop at this section, but what we're going to do pick up next is we're going to see about how Christ interacts, and we're going to look at his divine works, okay, is this representative of who God is, and of accepting divine worship, which we know full well that no person, being, etc., deserves worship. God will not give his glory to anyone but himself. So we're going to look at that in our next section.